From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. This is your weekly podcast about consumption. It is now February. We have taken a shower or two and gotten rid of all that sweaty January bullshit, and we are back to talk about another movie. Of course, we are proud members of the Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our upcoming and previous episodes at yourunpodcast.com. While you're there, please check out some of the other shows as well. A lot of people put a lot of effort into making great content for you, and it would be great for you to take some time to check it out. Also, maybe more importantly than anything I just said, with me is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast, and his name is Sean. And Sean, how are you this lovely evening?
I'm all pumped up from all that January workout, and I have to say, who's going to believe a talking head, John? Get a job in a sideshow.
Perfect. So, with that in mind, talking heads and all, what have you been watching this week, Sean?
I got the chance to watch a few things. So we talked, I think it was last week, we talked about that George Romero Resident Evil documentary that we watched, and a movie that they mentioned in that is a Japanese movie from 1989 called Sweet Home. And Sweet Home is essentially, so when they made Sweet Home, they made a game called Sweet Home, coincidentally, for the NES, for the Nintendo.
Set in Alabama.
Yes, yep, exactly. Leonard Skinner was there. And the game that was based on the movie is the premise or what Resident Evil itself is based on. So if you follow all that logic, right? Resident Evil, the game, is based on the Sweet Home game on the NES, which was based on the movie of the same name.
I remember them talking about the game. I don't remember the movie, but okay.
Yeah, so anyways, I watched Sweet Home, and it's essentially, like, to boil it down to the very basics, it's a haunted house movie about a television crew that gets access to this haunted mansion, essentially. And then, of course, what do you think happens? Hilarity ensues. So it has some really interesting, good. There's a big question mark on that.
Busta Rhymes doing karate. Because the last time I saw a haunted house movie with a TV crew in it, Busta Rhymes fucked up Michael Myers.
No, it doesn't have either of those things. But it has decent. Yeah, I know. I can agree. It has decent special effects. It was an alright movie. I would, if you're into Japanese horror, or if you're into like the haunted house thing, it's kind of interesting. I don't really want to give it all away, but let's just say the shadows are what can attack people. So that's number one, what I watched. Number two, I just recently watched the 30 for 30. I don't know if you've seen this one, the New York Sack Exchange. Have you seen this one?
No, I haven't.
Heard of this?
I'm not even familiar with it.
So it's the story of the like early 80s New York Jets defensive line, which was Abdul Salam, Joe Klecko, Marty Lyons, and Mark Gastineau. And they were, one of the greatest defensive lines in football. I think Gastineau had 22 sacks, like that. He had the record for a long time until Michael Strahan.
1980. Yeah. That's huge. So,
yeah.
Was it
80s,
still...
Yeah.
How many games did they play then? It wasn't at 16 yet, was it?
I think it was at 16 because they showed some footage and it was like game 16. Okay. And it was the final game of the season. They just made it into the playoffs. But like some of those guys had like double-digit sacks. Like I think Marty Lyons and Mark Gastineau had, I want to say it was 20 sacks each or something like that. I mean, they had a lot of fucking sacks. And Gastineau would do his dance and stuff. Anyways, it's really, the movie's really about not only how good they were, but why they kind of never really got past just being a good regular season team. Like they never really went anywhere in the playoffs. And a lot of it seemed to come down to the fact that they just couldn't get along with each other. I don't really know how that played into it, but a lot of it seems to stem from Mark Gastineau just being a huge putz. Like what he does, there's a part in the movie, I don't know where this was filmed because it wasn't part of this documentary. It was like a clip that they showed, and it was Mark Gastineau confronting Brett Favre about laying down for Michael Strahan, and he's like, I want my sack back.
That came up recently.
It was a signing.
Yeah, that came up just recently, like around Christmas time or something like that. I remember hearing about that.
So it might have been from this, because I think this was a 2024 30 for 30 But I don't know. Mark Gastineau seems like a huge putz. And yeah, I don't know. I just kind of laughed at the part where he's like, I want my sack back. And Brett Favre's like, well, I think that's going to hurt. And he's like, I mean, Brett Favre's a categorical piece of shit anyways. It would have been great to see him get sacked as a 50-year-old man, but I just don't think, I don't know. It's just kind of, I don't know, just kind of pointless. And then third, the last thing I'll mention is I just started watching, I'm not very far through it because it's 6 hours long, the In Search of Darkness 1990 through 1994. So I'm about, like I said, I'm about maybe 30 to 40 minutes into it, maybe an hour at the most. And of course, this is another one where, just like with the last three, you watch them and you're like, oh, I want to watch that movie. I want to watch that movie. I'm just taking notes on all these movies that they're showing and they're talking about. And I don't know if you started watching it or not yet, but they...
I haven't had a chance. I saw it was available and it's high up on the to watch list, but I know it's long. And I was like, I don't even have time to entertain starting that yet. So
yeah, they do, instead of doing the box covers, they do it with like DVD covers now. So it's a time appropriate. But this is kind of, they subtitle it basically like the Lost Horror, like Lost Generation of Horror, whatever, the 90s, early 90s. But yeah, that's really all I've got going for me so far. But that's an interesting one. I want to finish it by the next time we talk. But, we'll see what happens.
So for me, I didn't have a lot of time to watch stuff. So this is kind of a mix of things I've watched in the last 2 days and things that have kind of piled up. I have kind of fallen down a little bit of a Kung Fu well on Tubi. A lot of it's not Shaw Brothers stuff, but it's like Shaw Brothers type stuff. Movies like, I'm just going to ramble off a handful of them, like Dragon Fist, The Eight Escorts, Shaolin Drunken Monk, and Snake Fist of the Buddhist and stuff like that. So those very old, like late 50s to early 70s, like Kung Fu movies where the story is questionable at best, but there's a lot of fighting and the fighting is very surprisingly well choreographed for, whatever it is. And like I said, I can't say that I follow all these movies, but I have a hell of a lot of fun with them every time that I've gone through this it's like something that I do every 4 to 5 years. I just go through a 6-month period of I'm going to watch as much old Kung Fu shit as I possibly can. I guess I've kind of restarted that. So that's been pretty entertaining. The dubbing tracks are all fucking terrible. And that almost adds to whether it's the dubbing or some of them are subtitled, it just kind of depends. Like with Tubi, you just kind of hit play and what you get is what you get. You're not really getting choices, Either way, I don't know which is better because some of the translation in the dub track, it's I highly doubt that that's what they said. And then when they subtitle, it's almost worse. But it's a lot of good, loud grunts and slapping and kicking and occasional punching and all that type of stuff. So there's a lot of good stuff on Tubi right now. You almost have to, it's weird. I'm sure it's different for me than other people. My Tubi stuff is almost all a variety of horror movies. There's a lot of Jean-Claude Van Damme in there, which I'm not mad about. Scooby-Doo pops up constantly and
fits the theme.
All of a sudden, it's starting to recognize oh, you went through this Asian monster movie thing in, what was it, November or December? I was watching that. And now it's starting to pick up on oh, he likes this garbage too. So it's just this wonderful tidal wave of garbage that keeps getting thrown at me and it keeps working.
One of the many reasons to log into Tubi, because all those recommendations. I know mine are a lot of B movies, all types.
And that's kind of what I get too. And every now and then there's I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but it will put in they call it ethnic action or something. It's all these B movies from I think it's hood drama or something like that. I don't know. It's not something that I've watched more than I watched one of them. It was this sort of story told through the guise of Grand Theft Auto, but with actual people acting it. And it was funny in a different kind of bad way, but I was I don't know how this got recommended, but whatever. Speaking of garbage on Tubi, I don't know why I put this on. Maybe it's because of the movie that we're going to be talking about next week, but I, for the first time in a very, very long time, rewatched Hercules in New York. And if you ever had questions about how far Arnold Schwarzenegger has come as an actor, get on Tubi right now. It's still on there, and go watch Hercules in New York, and you will be amazed at how good of an actor Arnold Schwarzenegger is by the mid 90s compared to what he was in whatever year this movie came out, because it's not without its a little bit of charm, because it's still Arnold, and he's kind of like, I don't want to call him innocent, but he almost plays like innocent, dumb, big guy. That's kind of what the premise is. But this movie is shit. Like, it is just a shit movie. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. Like, there is like stereotypical Jewish guy that's like his manager / bookie or something, who keeps like selling out Arnold to some like mob guys, but the mob guys are real like 40s looking mob dudes with like big derby hats and shitty cigars that are, it's just everything about it. It's like, I'm not quite sure what the goal was for this movie, but if the goal was to like make a piece of shit that happened to have Arnold Schwarzenegger in it, you succeeded.
Accomplished.
Right. The only other thing I really watched that is moderately worth talking about, there's a new documentary series that is on, I think it's on TV, it's airing on ID, but I watched it on, what's it, HBO Now or Max or whatever the fuck they're calling it now. The series is called The Curious Case, and the first one is supposed to be about Bam Margera, the jackass guy and like drugged out, whatever.
Yeah.
So I watched that, and to be perfectly honest, I watched it because it was only an hour long and I needed something to talk about today. So I was like, all right, well, let's watch this real quick. There's a little bit about, like, in this hour documentary, I'd say probably like 45 minutes about it is about that chick Lima that did his like drug therapy thing when he was trying to get clean before whatever the fuck he's doing now. It's way more about that and whatever's going on with her and her business that's now like closed because there's a lot of ethical questions, I guess is a professional way to put it.
Okay.
I don't know how much you've followed that story, like for whatever reason. I think it's just because of the like, you know, generation that I grew up in. Whenever something happens with like any of the guys from Jackass, it always pops up in my news feed. So I feel like I'm informed enough about those people. So I didn't really get anything about him that I didn't already know, which I was kind of hoping for that. I wanted to see more of like his spiral and stuff. Like, you know, let's dig into that. But it's really more about, I can't even call her a doctor because she's not a doctor. She's a person who had enough money to essentially start this kind of like therapeutic, like VR related, like drug therapy service or something like that. Like basically, I don't know. She essentially has this program that simulates situations that an addict might be in. Like they focus really on this one chick who died, who used to live on Skid Row. And they show inside what she's seeing in the VR. It's very realistic is what they tell you, but it looks like it's about N64, like GoldenEye graphics. So I don't know how realistic it really is. But it's kind of funny because they show her like on quote digital Skid Row. And there's like the most obvious, like, oh, there's a bottle of Absolute on a couch that happens to be in the middle of the road for some reason, you know, all this type of stuff. She goes, this is very realistic and whatever. And it's one of those things that you almost, an hour really doesn't, like with how many like questions they ask in this documentary, an hour doesn't even scratch the surface. Like there's so much more that they should really go into this Lima chick and whatever bullshit's going on there, even though her business is already like closed because she's fucked up apparently. And if you go into this wanting to see Bam Margera, like again, yeah, you do see him in this documentary, but it's
he walks through the background of a shot. Oh, there he is.
Couple times. But it's really more about her than it is about him, which feels very bait and switch based off the title of the documentary. So that's kind of annoying. But it's, again, for a little short 1 hour, like, documentary style thing, like, we'll see what the other ones are. I might watch more of them. I might not. I might be real hesitant, too, because if I watch another one and it's another, like, I don't even know what the next one is. Let's say the next one is about Ted Bundy or whatever. And then they go into it and start talking about, like, President Nixon. I mean, like, what the fuck is this? Or, you know, whatever.
I saw that come up, the Bam Margera one, because we did watch, as a family, we watched The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, which I talked about last year, I'm sure a couple different times. And season 3 came out, and that's the show about a little person, basically a girl who was adopted from the Ukraine, and they kept like trying to make parallels, or the family that eventually adopted her was trying to make parallels between her and the movie The Orphan. Like they were making all these claims, but they were from that movie. And she got adopted by another family, and the third season just came out, and I think it's the final season. It's a 4 or 5 hour one, and it was on Discovery Plus and the ID channel. So I think it was ID channel, and they really just like January 4th, episode 1 comes out, January 5th, episode 2, and then the rest of the season was out the next day. So I don't know if it's being aired at all on TV or if it's just exclusive to Discovery Plus or HBO because they're the same company now or whoever owns that. But then I saw the Bam Margera one come up, and I wasn't sure when I saw it if it was new or if it was some old thing before he recovered. I don't know his status now, but I wasn't sure when it came out, but it sounds like it's probably after this one or right around it, like relatively new.
I don't know if or when it aired on TV. I just know that it popped up as something advertised on whether it's HBO or, that's connected to Hulu and all that. It popped up on something that I saw as far as an advertisement, and they're advertising it as new season, new everything. So I'm assuming it's pretty fresh, and the information that's in it goes all the way up to, I want to say like September or October of 2024. So it's pretty, recent
fresh
as far as that goes. Yeah. So, but there is a like trailer, I guess, for the next episode. And again, I don't remember what it was. It wasn't someone whose name like popped up. I was like, oh, I know that guy. I'll watch that. So there's definitely more coming, but it doesn't look like it's going to be more about him or, anything along those lines. Which ID is basically just like it all, like not Discovery. They're all like documentary type shit, aren't they?
I thought it was like, kind of true crime adjacent.
Yeah, I remember they used to do a ton of like serial killer stuff before Netflix really.
And Forensic Files.
Yeah, all that type of stuff. So that's fine. I don't have basic cable anymore, so I have no idea what's on that channel. Really, I just kind of putz around to different panels on different apps, right? But yeah, that's all I really got for this week. So unless we get anything else, I suggest that we go ahead and reanimate ourselves into a break and then come back and talk about the most romantic month of the year in film form. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, well, we'll be right back. Grab yourself some champagne and roses or something. Hi, everyone. AI John here. Did you know that we're on the You Run Podcast Network? YouRunPodcast.com is home to great shows like You Gonna Eat That Crust, Pop Culture Reflections Podcast, Voices of the Mausoleum, and many more. Head over to YouRunPodcast.com and find your new favorite show today. All right, so we are back, and if you didn't figure out from the title of this episode or what we just said before a break, we are talking about the movie Re-Animator from 1985. We start these with third-party reviews, and there's a ton of them on Rotten Tomatoes now. We're back to being able to review movies on Rotten Tomatoes, but I still went to Letterboxd for these because I just found these reviews to be a little bit funnier this week. I'm going to read two. They're both really short, so don't worry too much. We're going to start with Russman, who gives this movie 4 out of 5 stars, and he says, best use of Talking Heads poster ever. Which was in my notes. I was like, oh, Talking Heads poster. How did I never notice that? And however many times I saw this. And then Kia gives this movie 3.5 out of 5 stars and says, I'd expect
should have been
nothing
a Hyundai.
less. Might have been the best dad joke that's ever been on this show.
Ba-dum-bum.
Kia says, I'd expect nothing less from a motherfucker named Herbert. So with that in mind, Sean, what is Reanimator all about?
All right, so we're not talking about the prequel called Animator. We're talking about the actual, real life thing. I don't know where to go from there, but called Reanimator. And for that, we go to IMDb, we type in those words, and it brings up a movie, and it gets 7.1 out of 10, 74,000 ratings. It's kind of nice to be in the double-digit ratings these days. And we go to the storyline of the plot. Never quite sure which one's which, but we go to the one on top because they wouldn't put it on top if it shouldn't be first. And it says, after an odd new medical student arrives on campus, a dedicated local and his girlfriend become involved in bizarre experiments centering around the reanimation of dead tissue. If we scroll on down,
I don't know which character they're referring to as a dedicated local.
Yeah.
But I really like the description as a dedicated local.
I had to kind of laugh a little bit to myself when I read that. So we go on down to the storyline. It is very long. It is via Nick Reganis, who is a frequent contributor to the show. Thank you, Nick. And I'm just going to read I don't even know where I'm going to stop. It says, obsessed with the idea of overcoming the obstacle of death and determined to vindicate himself by backing up his theory, ambitious medical student Herbert West arrives in New England after surviving a horrific accident at the Institute of Medicine in Switzerland. And before long, Herbert picks up where he left off, at first experimenting with dead feline tissue and then human cadavers, talking his skeptic roommate, Dan Kane, I almost said Dean Kane, into joining his audacious project. But as the two visionary scientists burrow deeper and deeper into uncharted territory, West's reanimated corpses start walking around the campus, catching the eye of Dr. Hill. And the rest we'll talk about because he kind of goes into a little bit. I kind of want to leave a little bit up to the imagination, something for us to talk about.
So before we get into that, this movie has kind of a pretty impressive cast for what it is.
Yes.
This is very much so a Dewey Podmonster movie kind of cast as far as the people that are in this. But who are some of the people that are in this?
Well, I was hoping you would take that off my plate because this is like a who's who of B movies, really. B horror movies, B movies in general. I'm just going to kind of go over the cast names. We've got Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West. And like, I know Jeffrey Combs best from probably this and then
Guyver.
From Beyond. Yeah, and The Guyver, exactly. Robot Jocks. And we have Barbara Crampton, who's, again, like a scream queen, I guess if that's still a
horror royalty.
Yeah, a term that people use. She plays Megan Halsey. She was in Chopping Mall, again, From Beyond, Puppet Master Trancers 2, more and more and more, keep going. Bruce Abbott is the one that kind of sticks out because he plays Dan Kane. I feel like his biggest roles are this and the sequel, Bride of Reanimator. And he was, I don't know, on a few maybe other things, but I looked through his list and didn't really recognize most of those other movies. We have Robert Sampson as Dean Halsey. You may recognize him again from Robot Jocks and a bunch of other stuff. I mean, a lot of these guys have hundreds of credits. And David Gale as Dr. Hill. He's also in John's favorite movie, The Guyver, or just Guyver. And again, tons of other B movies. He's in over 100 episodes of a show called Search for Tomorrow, which I don't know what that is, but he's in 100 episodes of it.
You buried the lead. This movie has Arnold Schwarzenegger's stunt double.
Is that the one who plays the first human?
Yeah, he plays Melvin the Reanimated. That's his character's name. But yeah,
I looked at his list and I was like, oh, I don't know if I recognize some of these, so I'm not going to bring him up.
No, it's interesting because one of the things I was listening to going into this was brought up Peter Kent, and they're like, this big motherfucker, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, he's Arnold Schwarzenegger's stunt double in movies like Terminator 2 and and basically a bunch of movies. Like if you look at his credits, he's he's a stunt double in Predator, Total Recall, Terminator. So basically that whole era, he was Arnold's stunt double. So
is he the one that grabs Edward Furlong off the motorcycle in
Yes, and
T2?
That's why I was bringing it up.
Perfect.
So, yep. So yeah, little preview for next week. We will talk about Peter Kent again very shortly.
Something.
So in some movie. So
can I make a dark admission here?
I think I'm getting to that. So
okay,
go for it.
This is the first time I've ever seen this.
And that's where I was going to go. So
I knew it.
For me, this movie for me was one of many video store finds. And we'll get into this movie's reputation before we're done here. But for me, I found this movie sometime in high school. I think, if I'm being honest, all I really cared about at that point was, whole bunch of gore, Barbara Crampton naked through half the movie, and glow sticks. I think that's all I really cared about the first time that I saw this. I don't have the infatuation with this movie that a lot of people do. I will say I think this is one of those movies that has really earned the title cult classic, and we'll definitely get into that more, and I can see why, but I'm not as infatuated with it. So for you, it sounds like this was kind of a blind spot of some sort.
Well, I mean, I've always been aware of the movie as far as I can remember, because, being a person that would go to video stores, this is like an iconic cover.
Yeah.
If you've been to a video store ever in your life, like if you can remember video stores, you've more than likely seen this tape somewhere. Like every video store seemingly probably has this tape. So I was aware of this and Bride of, but it's just not something that I had ever seen. Like I saw From Beyond. That's really the only thing kind of comparable to this that I'd seen. And it has a lot of the same cast members. And it's also based on a Lovecraft story or whatever. That I'd seen that. And that's a different kind of weird. I don't know. Not like it turned me off or anything. It was just not something that I ever felt compelled to rent.
Well, this is an interesting movie too, because I mean, this is a movie that it might be just as known for times that it's been referenced in pop culture as it is for its own existence as a film. I mean, this movie has mentions in Frankenhooker, The Simpsons, American Beauty, The Guyver, of course, because half the cast, I believe it's the same director too, from The Guyver. And I actually looked it up. There was something like 57 different movies or TV shows that reference this movie at some point. And that's just like off a quick Google search. It's probably more than that. So whether you've actually seen this movie or not you necessarily, but anyone, I'd be surprised if you're not at least on some level aware that this movie exists. So, and I think that's kind of interesting with this because unlike a lot of movies that kind of fall in what people think of like as a cult classic, this one's just, it really has become kind of a mainstay in the world of pop culture in its own little weird way. Since this is your first experience with it, did you have any expectation going into it, or was this, I mean, outside of it being a movie that was probably going to be schlocky and gory?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I really knew about it was Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton.
Okay.
That's really it. Like, I knew that, I assumed from the title that there was some rising of the dead, but that's really all I knew about it. And I want to kind of preface this whole conversation. I'm assuming we watched the same cut. We watched the hour and 45 minute, like, unrated version.
I watched like an hour and 30-minute cut, I believe, but I've seen an unrated cut before. I might or might not have one shipping to me that's delayed right now. So,
all right.
But I know what's in the unrated cut that's cut out, and it doesn't really affect the movie that much. So a lot of what's cut out in the unrated stuff is some shots with more peen in it, which is, whatever. Need a little more dong in your movie, I guess, and go watch the unrated cut. And it's basically like some stuff that I feel like, from what I remember, the unrated stuff or the director's cut, whatever we're calling that, the longer cut, it just kind of adds more spoon feeding of the story to you, where the cut down version that's around 125 or so assumes that the audience is knowing what's going on. Is basically the difference between the two. So I think from a pacing standpoint, I like that because it does make things kind of chug along better. And again, for me, this was not a first watch, so I kind of knew what was going to happen and, that type of stuff. I wanted to rewatch it just because it'd been a little bit since I had watched it, so I needed to refresh myself. But that said, there's a lot of things that happen in this movie that the rules of this is one of those movies where the rules of this reanimation juice, glow stick stuff, they're really questionable. Like, there's really no rhyme or reason to half the shit that happens in this movie, but it plays out in an entertaining way more often than not.
So let me ask you, can you give us the Cliff Notes version of what happens in this movie?
Sure. So for me, I'd say the Cliff Notes version is Herbert West comes to town and wants to reanimate dead bodies. He goes there specifically because David Gale's character does research on, he has this whole 6 to 12 minute rule about how long a brain can survive after death. And Dr. West breaks pencils and gets pissed off about it and wants to prove that he can reanimate the dead or reanimate dead brain cells more than 6 to 12 minutes after and go farther than what David Gale's character said. So they're kind of adversary with it. And of course, chaos ensues. Things happen in the movie where bodies are reanimated and they have disastrous results and get gradually more chaotic as things go along.
So Dan Kane, which I always want to call him Dean Kane, but Dan Kane
I always do too.
he's a medical student and he is dating, well, his fiance is the daughter of the dean of the medical school, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he is working at the hospital and West comes in, and it's like a medical school, a medical college or something. And so West comes in as a student and Kane is assigned with kind of showing him the ropes or whatever. And there's a point where, so I didn't watch the regular R-rated cut. I've only seen the unrated, right? So the thing I don't understand,
unrated.
What?
I believe they're both unrated because they didn't try to get the movie rated when they initially released it because they knew it would get on an NC-17. So
you're right.
Went the unrated route.
So in the regular version, so not the extended version, is there's a scene where Dr. Hill is talking to Dean Halsey, and he's like hypnotizing him to agree that Dan is not a good guy.
That's not in the shorter cut.
Okay. That's really the reason I wanted you to explain what the movie was about, because I find that really weird that Dr. Hill has this ability to just hypnotize and it's not ever like mentioned until it happens.
So that's in the reason why that's in there, from what I remember, they shot that scene initially to explain how because eventually his head gets removed and his body starts, three stooging around or whatever. It's used to explain how he's controlling his body once it's detached from his head or whatever. So once he's two separate entities, that's why they put it in there. But they nixed it in the shorter cut because they just assumed people would figure out that he's controlling his body and didn't really think it needed the additional explanation.
So he controls his body by hypnotizing himself?
No, it's more so, I think the idea was that he has some sort of telekinetic power or something. Okay. And that's why it was in there. Not necessarily. Yes, hypnosis is what he does, but I think they're trying to show that he can alter consciousness with his mind, I guess.
Okay. I don't know why I could like totally believe that he can just move his body without a head on it, but he can't hypnotize people. Like, I don't understand why that's a disconnect.
Yeah.
But like, how do they explain in the regular version that Dean Halsey likes Dan and all of a sudden he doesn't?
What was the reason for that? I don't remember at the moment, to be perfectly honest.
I would find that confusing personally. Because it's like a 180. Like, he really likes Dan a lot. And he's like, yeah, I'll give you a recommendation letter for this grant or whatever it is. Another college or a grant or a scholarship or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden he's like, you can't marry him and he's bad news and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, I guess I understand. The hypnosis piece helped me. I mean, I didn't have any question. Like, oh, okay, he got hypnotized and the guy told him, no, this guy's no good. And he just went along with it. But I was just wondering if with that taken out of the movie, how would you know?
I think for me, this movie kind of lives in the vein of movies like, quite frankly, like an Evil Dead 2 or like a Dead Alive, where it's almost like a detriment to ask too many questions like that, especially the first time you watch it. I'm not saying that you like as a negative for you, like being curious about it. I'm saying this is almost one of those movies that it's so far out there at times that it's almost easier to just kind of watch it because honestly, the movie is kind of played comedically. This really isn't. It's a horror movie, but I really don't find this movie to be scary at any point. Like everything that happens, it's done in a way that's very schlocky. It's obviously very low budget. I know a lot of the characters or the actors that are in this were play actors to begin with, like stage actors to begin with. And there's a lot of scenes where it looks like they shot this on a very small set that was almost set up like a live play set, like the way, like a stage for, play, not for a film. Especially like when you get to the scene with the cat where they chuck it into the wall, or some of those where it's, whenever they're in a basement, it looks very much so like a live action play that happens to be recorded as opposed to like a film set. Or at least maybe that's just me.
I mean, I looked at IMDb as I was watching it, just to kind of, I like to like see who the cast is and who's in the movie, and I can kind of research it as I'm watching it. And the thing to me that I looked on here, and maybe I don't know, maybe it just didn't hit me. I didn't find it all that comedic. I see the genres on IMDb are comedy, horror, and sci-fi. I wasn't like creeped out and I wasn't scared watching this, but I could see, I just took it like at face value for whatever reason. There were like certain things that I were like, oh, that's kind of funny. But there was nothing like laugh out loud to me that stood out. The only part that I really think I kind of laughed about was that, you mentioned it, the basement scene where they're chasing the cat down.
Yeah.
I did laugh at that because that was just kind of silly and ridiculous and all the sounds edited and everything. But I took it all at face value. Watching it, I'm like, oh, this is, I mean, you know, when you watch, you and I, people that listen to the show have watched so many horror movies, it's very hard to get into that mind frame of actually being, you know, quote unquote scared.
Sure.
But I find it amusing now that I just took it all at such face value and didn't really see much of the comedic side to it. But I mean, I could see some people being like really amused by it.
Well, when I say, you know, that I don't think there's anything about this scary, I mean, in general, like, I would call this a horror movie because I don't know what else to call it. You're talking about a movie where they reanimate the dead and there's plenty of corpses and plenty of gore and all that type of stuff to go around. So I think, for lack of better genreing, horror is probably where it would fall in best. And sci-fi and comedy are probably right there behind it.
Not drama.
But no, probably not. But when I say I don't find many movies to be truly scary, but like, there's certainly movies that do better at like portraying a creepy like vibe or a creepy scene or something that's intended to make you feel uneasy than what this does. And
there's
I
just
think
not much tension.
Yeah. And that's why I said I think it's more in the vein of a movie like a Dead Alive, like a Evil Dead 2, like something like that, where it's very intentional trying to blend genres. Or at least I got the impression they're trying to push for kind of like a weird, I almost feel like the comedy is like going to tone down the gore that you see. Because if they went like a darker, more sinister tone to this, you'd almost have a whole different movie because it would just be more sadistic, I guess. Like, this has so many, like, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a movie where there's a lot of people that are killed, reanimated, dismembered, etc., etc. And because of the tone of the movie, it doesn't come off, I mean, it is sadistic, but it doesn't come off or isn't played off as sadistic because either these characters are super matter of fact about it, or they're quirky about it, or they're so over the top that it just kind of takes whatever tension there could have been and replaces it with a whole different emotion.
Yeah, it kind of makes it more on the silly end rather than it being terrifying. I mean, right. You said like Brain Dead or Dead Alive or movies like that. I guess, yeah, I could see where you're coming from. I usually find over the top horror like that. I know like Brain Dead, Dead Alive is supposed to be quote unquote funny, and we've had this conversation. I don't know if we've ever talked about it.
Neither
of us really
care about that movie from what I remember.
And don't find it very funny. But I think when you have like that ridiculousness, I guess that can be conveyed as comedy. So, sure. But I find this movie to be much as I sound like I'm being critical, I find it to be infinitely more entertaining than a movie like Brain Dead or Brain Damage or whatever. So I want to put that out there.
I think that's going to be right. I think that's going to be in the, you know, obviously that everyone's opinion is going to be different, but if someone was asking me, I haven't seen Reanimator before, those are the kind of movies I would say, did you like this? Did you like that? I'd even say, did you like Return of the Living Dead? Because it's, again, kind of that genre blending, even though, well, I think Return of the Living Dead does it like 100 times better, but that's, we've already done that episode. Yes. We don't need to. So
this is Reanimator.
Right. We've kind of danced around it. What positives do you have from this one? We haven't even gotten to that yet. And we're like 30 minutes into this conversation. So,
I mean, like I said, I really thought that I found that cat scene like infinitely amusing. I didn't laugh. I wasn't like, you know, like I didn't wake anybody up in the house, but I thought it was, I found it to be funny. I think Jeffrey Combs is like, he makes this movie. His performance, his like breathless enthusiasm about everything that he's talking about sells the movie. If it was a different character or maybe a different, I don't know if he played it differently or a different actor played it, I don't think this hits nearly as hard as, you know, as it does. And I think that the special effects, while they're not like across the board great because some of them kind of look cheesier than others, and just by pure, I don't know, the way that things are set up, like there's no way you can have a guy holding his head and not have it look like a set of shoulders on top of a set of shoulders. But sure. I think the special effects technically, this is like a practical effect, just tour de force. I mean, I think a lot of the practical effects look really, really well done. I will say,
a lot of meat.
Yes, and the cat in the refrigerator at the beginning, we're like, oh, he's dead. Rufus, which is a weird name for a cat. The cat's name is Rufus. I was like, that might actually be a real dead cat. Although at the end of the credits, is it really?
So
they said no animals were harmed or killed in the making of this movie. Did they lie?
I don't know. I guess that depends how you define lie. The story that I heard, and I've heard more than once, is when they were getting ready to film that, they found a cat that was dead. Like it was already dead. So they used it because it was already dead. So it's not used in all, like the scene where he throws it, it's a puppet. And obviously the scene where they reanimate it, it's a puppet. But the scene where it's
really
the scene where it's in the fridge is an actual dead cat that they happen to find. And that's also why the cat is black, that, is the puppet that they deal with later. So I don't know. And for that matter, I don't know where they're throwing a real, for all I know, he spiraled through a real dead cat into a wall. I have no idea.
Sure.
But again, the story that I've heard is they found a cat that they happened to find a cat that was dead, and they used that for the movie. So the reason they put that in there, that line in there, is because they weren't the ones that killed it, but they did use its body. Supposedly.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I understand some people could object to that. I'm perfectly fine with that explanation.
I thought it looked like a taxidermy cat to me. Like someone had bought it from like a flea market or something. You see weird shit at flea markets, and I would assume in the 80s it's probably even worse.
Give me a dead cat, would you please?
Again, your guess is as good as mine, but I think if there's people that were involved with the film admitting that they used a cat that was already dead, I feel like if you were going to lie about it, you would lie in the other direction.
Right. And then last, big bullet point, about this movie, I did have one genuine jump scare, and that's when Dan and Meg are about to make up, and Dean Halsey, busts through the door. His fist comes through the door. I was like, oh, I'm watching the movie, and all of a sudden this fist busted. I was like, oh, I kind of actually did jump from that. So that was a genuine jump scare that I had. But yeah, I mean, that, and I did, okay, I have to admit to a second laugh. In the scene at the beginning when Meg and Dan are making out and they keep throwing the cat onto the bed, I did think that was clearly someone throwing a cat. Sure. It wasn't a cat jumping on them. So I left at that too. So I take back
Rufus.
Yeah.
Little cockblock Rufus. So
poor bastard.
For me, I really like the color palette on this movie. It's interesting because again, well established, the Reanimator juice or whatever they call it is just glow stick juice in a jar or a syringe or whatever. But it's a really, really good, super cheap effect. It looks awesome in the whole movie. And it looks so good that it, to an extent, almost drowns out the rest of the color in the movie. This is a movie that's shot in full color, but with the exception of that neon green color and the blood red that they use throughout it, you almost want a cut of this movie where it's black and white, aside a Sin City cut where it's those two elements have color and everything else is black and white. So I think it looks really cool for that. And I think that's one of the things that kind of separates this from some of the other movies that we mentioned is the color palette on this. For whatever reason, really sticks with me. It looks really unique, even though I'm sure there's plenty of other drab movies that have something, as a focal point like that. But it works in this one for me. You mentioned Jeffrey Combs. He's great. I think David Gale is great in this movie too. He plays a perfect asshole in this movie. He is a complete prick, and he's one of those guys that you fucking love to hate, and you love it even more when he gets his, and you get to see him get his twice in this movie. So that's entertaining for what it is. But he's kind of one of those underspoken, great bad guys that just doesn't get enough credit, really. And I'm not even sure if he's still around, if he's still acting. I'm assuming he's probably dead by now or reanimated. I'm not sure. But it is kind of a bummer that as much notoriety as he gets for this and a handful of other things, I feel like he really could have been a bigger guy in that whole like B movie circuit or whatever. So that's fun. And then, yeah, the effects in this, when they kill Arnold's stunt double with the bone saw through the chest, and, you know, that is a great kill. Even the, like, seeing how they open this movie where this raging zombie gets his eyes popped out of his head, it's like, okay, this movie is, if nothing else, you're going to get some splatter factor in this movie. And that's always, for this kind of movie, that's a good selling. Because I think we can both vouch to this. We've watched a lot of bad movies where it's like, well, there's a lot of carnage in it, so at least that's entertaining. And if nothing else, you're going to get that out of this movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of splatter, a lot of hits to people that causes blood to fly, and that's always a fun thing.
For sure. How about negatives?
Not really any to speak of. I mean, I think, like I mentioned before, the Dr. Hill effect with the head, like carrying the head. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's par for the course for this movie. You can't knock the movie for it. And how else are you going to do something like that without CG or, you know, stuff like that? I thought some of the ways using the effects or when Gale's head is separated from his body, a lot of the effects that show that are really cleverly done. Like they do a really good job masking that. So even some of those things, I thought it was funny when they would have at the end when his head is being held out where you can't see the hands holding it. And it's like, it's just his head's on the edge of the frame. Okay. Maybe I laughed at this a lot more than I'm willing to admit. I laughed at that. I'm like, the guy's head he's clearly just like, you know, barely off. And I think there was one scene where it's like he had almost like this, like a flesh dicky around his neck, and you can see the rest of his body kind of sitting there while all this severed, just ragged flesh is hanging from it. But I really don't have many negatives. I mean, one thing that with watching even an extended cut at an hour and 44 minutes or whatever the one was that I watched, you could sometimes bag on maybe the pacing being off, but even with those extended sequences, I appreciated that because I would have just had questions, like I said earlier, about the dean, about other characters that were hypnotized that suddenly changed their opinion. Without that extra explanation, I would have just been like, what's going on here? So I can't even say the pacing was off, even on a longer cut. I thought it was really well paced. I don't really have nothing I can really say as a true negative.
Yeah, I don't have any huge negatives with this one either. I think the two things I would say, one isn't even the movie's fault. One thing I have this is a pet peeve with this movie, and it's because of the internet. Dr. Gruber is not named after Hans fucking Gruber. This movie predates Die Hard by 3 years. So if anything, they stole Hans Gruber's name from this movie, but I highly doubt that's the case. So I've seen a handful of people claim that Hans Gruber, or they got his name from Die Hard. I'm like, no, they fucking didn't.
I did think that. And I let it just wash over me because I was like, that's probably not. Doesn't have anything to do with just coincidence.
You know, if this came out in 1989, I'd be fine with that. Sure, maybe they did. But
I mean, I'm okay with the headcanon of it being the same guy. That's fine with me.
And that's
whatever.
fine too.
Cool.
If that somehow turned out to be the case, I wouldn't have that problem either. But I don't think anyone can claim that they stole it from Die Hard because Die Hard didn't exist. And even in 1985, I don't think it took them 3 years to make Die Hard. They probably made that in 1987 and released in 88, something like that. So maybe 86. Either way, this predates that. And I already mentioned the only other thing that this is a nitpick more than a dislike because it really doesn't, maybe it's because I have a little bit of nostalgia for this movie, but the powers of this Reanimator fluid, like what it does and what it doesn't do, the rules of the movie, I guess, or the rules of what's happening are very haphazardly thrown together and seem to change as the movie sees fit. I know there's like a throwaway line where they say basically the smarter the animal, the more violent they become for some reason. But they never really explain why or like have I would love to see one, you know, if they're going to do that, have one like Zombie where he's just like a dumb guy. So he's really docile and just sitting there like drinking a beer and like watching a football game or something. That would have been a funny little gag. I haven't seen either of the sequels, so I don't have a good excuse for that. I just haven't gotten around to watching them. So maybe that is in one of the later movies, but Yeah, that would be, again, the biggest nitpick I have is the rules of what this drug or what these zombies do or are capable of are really like questionable at best and really like inconsistent.
I was going to ask if you knew and if it was covered in the sequels, but I guess you answered my question. The origin of the juice. I guess that would be, I mean, I took this movie solely at pretty face value, as I mentioned before. So I didn't question a lot.
They went to Party City and bought a whole case of glow sticks.
Cracked them open, poured them in a jug, called it a day. That would be thinking about it now after the fact, that would be my only kind of question. Like, what's the origin? Because I never really get into it, and that's fine. You don't need to know. It's just a mystery juice, and it came from somewhere, and Dr. Herbert West, he's not really a doctor, but West doesn't need to tell you how he does it. He just does it.
Yeah, and I would I would assume when they made this, they probably didn't have a whole franchise planned or like sequels planned. I mean, this is one of those movies they famously made for not a lot of money and just kind of did what they could and set out to make like there's interviews where they are like, we set out to make the most gory and sexually uncomfortable movie that we could for whatever the budget was of this movie. And I think for the most part, they probably did achieve that because there's things that I could see how someone would be uncomfortable watching. I don't think they ever get to the point where they are that bad for this particular movie because everything stops before anything being around the bush. There's a like implied rape scene almost in this movie, but it stopped before that actually happens. So I could see because and I've said it 100 times on the show, I don't think that a rape scene's ever necessary for a movie by any stretch. For whatever reason, that scene in this movie, it's just kind of part of this movie. It doesn't like stick out to me like a lot of, maybe it's because it stops before anything really happens in the movie. It just doesn't bother me, or I don't get as like uppity about it as I would in, I don't know, Black Devil Doll from Hell, for example, or something like that.
What an example.
Yeah. Oh, do you think that scene's, I know it's probably the most controversial scene in this entire movie, aside from maybe the cat. Do you think it's all that?
Like you said, because it gets stopped, I think it's not as extreme as it could be, and I'm glad it got stopped. It's not something I would have.
Yeah, we don't need to see a whole thing.
Yeah, I'm good. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't really have an opinion on it. It's not, if it wasn't in there, it wouldn't take away from the movie. Like it could have stopped or even earlier, and it wouldn't have been. But I think the menace of it continuing and getting stopped before anything really does happen is, maybe it adds to it a little bit, but I mean, I don't, that's not a hill I would die on by any means.
Yeah. And honestly, that's kind of why I'm not worried about showing. So backtracking, we are showing this at Batch coming up here on the 13th of February. So that's what we want to talk about it now. We would like to have an episode to go along with most of these movies when we can. When I suggested that movie, I said it, then immediately thought, it does have that one scene in it. Then I was like, is that really any worse than some of the other things that we've shown? And honestly, I don't really think it is. Anything else you want to kind of hit on with this, or are we ready to fire up the grill?
No, I'm ready to eat some hot dogs.
What time is it?
Or cook them at least.
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
You want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Why not?
All right.
I guess I'll start by saying I can't believe I hadn't ever seen this movie before. It's definitely one of those, like I mentioned, see the box art in the video store kind of movies. And I don't really have a good reason. I don't know why I never stopped to watch it before, but I really just hadn't watched it. Like I said, the special effects are really masterful. If that's your bag, you're in for a treat because they're really good. I mentioned like I didn't laugh at it much, but then I went to like backtrack and say how I laughed a few times. So I think when it does have that humor, it's a nice touch. I didn't have all that many laugh out loud moments, but enough, I guess, thinking back, that did find it to be pretty funny. But how can you watch a fight with an undead cat and not get a little bit of a chuckle out of it? I had a fun time with it. If you haven't seen it, I think that you'd have a fun time with it too. I give Reanimator a full hot dog. This is a movie that I could see myself going back and watching again too. And I want to see how the sequels pan out. I don't know if the most recent one, which was like 15 years or something after I
think the last one's Beyond Reanimator. I think is the last one they did.
in the 20 teens or something.
There might be more. There might be a fourth one because I know the next one's Bride Reanimator. Then there's Beyond Reanimator, and I want to say there's another one too. But
regardless, I'm interested to see what happens next. So we can do that too. We have this magical Google machine that John can use to find out if there's a fourth. But regardless, I'm actually thinking about watching this. Really? Holy shit.
There's this one, Bride of Reanimator.
Yes.
Beyond Reanimator, which is 2003.
Okay.
2017 is Herbert West Reanimator.
Oh, yeah.
And then 2022 is Curse of the Reanimator.
Well, I'll commit myself to watching the next one. I don't know if I'll go into 5, but I'll watch the second one. Because it's Jeffrey Combs is at least in the second one.
He's in at least the next 2. I don't know about the super new ones that came out. So
okay. Well, I will put it here. You've heard it here first. I'll watch the second one, but I won't commit to any past that.
There you go.
Whose hot dog is this? That's yours?
Yeah, for me, I'm right there with you. Like, this is like a trip down nostalgia lane for me. Again, I found this as a teenager, and I gotta think there's a ton of people like me who found this as a teenager or probably way younger than they should have. And it's just kind of a dumb, fun movie. Like, it's got everything you want in a horror movie like this. It's silly, it's gory, it's a little ridiculous, and it's got replay value. It's the kind of movie that you can put on with a group of like-minded weirdos and kind of chuckle at. You know, it's a fun one for that type of thing. And it really is, you know, a movie. This will lead to our question of the week, but it's kind of one of those, when people say B movie or cult classic movie, I feel like this is one of those that you could point to and say, that is the definitive definition of a B movie or a cult classic type movie. It has notoriety. It's known in circles, whether people have seen it or not. And there's a reason that people reference back to it, you know, endlessly, even 40 years after the fact. So this is a full on hot dog, fire up the grill, have another one, maybe stick some glow stick in it and, you know, eat it a second time. So this movie is, yeah, well, you know,
eat it a second time.
Reanimated hot dogs, right?
Ooh.
So
Regurgitator.
It's got a little bit of everything that you really want for this genre, or that I want for this genre. It's not something that I want to watch every day. It's truthfully not something that I rewatch every year. It's not one of those, but it's absolutely one that I've gone back to periodically since I originally found it. And I can't see any reason why I would stop doing it.
I like that you can feel like you're being intellectual while watching a movie like this.
It's good to,
but you don't need to think about it.
That's going to lead us to, as I mentioned, our question of the week. This week's question of the week is, what is the ultimate cult classic horror film specifically? So we put this on all the socials that we participate on, and we got a few answers. We're going to start on Instagram because that's what I have pulled up right now. And our friends over at Dissect That Film said, since it did terribly at the box office in 1982, so 100% has to be The Thing, the definition of cult classic. That's an interesting one to me because although I totally agree that The Thing is an amazing movie, we've had that conversation as well.
We love it.
Yes. I really wonder if you can attach John Carpenter's name to something and still have it be cult classic at this point.
Was the question B movie?
Cult classic.
Okay.
Not B movie.
All right.
But I'll allow it because what else am I going
to take it back?
Next up, we have Justin from Pop Culture Reflections Podcast, another member of the UN Podcast Network. And he says, for me, it's Frankenhooker. But I also like cult classics like Hatchet, Reanimator, and Repulsion. So I haven't seen Repulsion, but I have obviously seen the other ones. Frankenhooker is another one that's way up there as far as cult classics are concerned in my book, and that I think that might even skew more towards the B movie category. Hatchet is an interesting one because, have you seen Hatchet?
I haven't. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen it.
It's weird to me, and this is like totally arbitrary, and I'm making up rules as I go, much like Reanimator.
There you go.
I feel like it's too new to be considered a cult classic.
It's like 20 teens.
I think it's early 2000s.
2010.
Yeah, they made like 4 or 5 of those too,
yeah.
so it's around there. But on the other hand, it's got like a lot of things. Like I know the first one's got Tony Todd in it. I'm pretty sure Danielle Harris is still in the first one. I know she's in the later ones. It's got Derek Mears in it. It's got Kane Hodder in it. It's got a lot of horror royalty in it. It kind of checks a lot of the boxes. I just don't know if there's if we still get cult classics in the 2000s as opposed to predating. But that's a debate that maybe we could have another time. Maybe we could do a whole live thing about that. If you want to hear that, let us know in some sort of comments. We might be able to debate what the merits are of a cult classic. Could be.
We could even have some guests.
Yeah. Be very arbitrary. Have to have an impartial judge to determine who wins said debate.
You just bring all of them on. We fight to the death. Whoever is left standing, their pick.
And then we inject ourselves with glow sticks and fix,
Duke
make it so we're not charged with murder. Yeah. Or duke it out again. Switching over to Blue Sky, our friends over at Podcast in the Woods say, I think it would have to be Rocky Horror Picture Show. It checks all the boxes. It's not quite mainstream, but it's beloved by many of us weirdos. Again, I didn't even think of that one because it's a musical. So I don't think of that, even though horror is in the name of it. I never really think of it as a horror movie. It certainly has horror elements of it. I absolutely love that movie. So this is one that was like, I even said to him, like, I love that you picked that because I wasn't thinking that at all. So great movie. If you somehow haven't seen Rocky Horror Picture Show, you should probably do that before it's banned in the not too distant future, because I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. And then also on Blue Sky, we go to Pearl, who is at xxpearlxx.bsky.social, because they're really long on Blue Sky. And she says, Burial Ground 1981. There's basically no plot, but it makes up for it with the what the fuck is happening of all it, and then you add some zombies. It's definitely a so bad that it's good type of.
So Burial Ground is also known as Zombie 3, right?
Believe so. Probably check that. I'm
just
trying
take
to
my
write
word for it.
Okay. Well, now I want it. Burial Ground 1981. The Night of Terror. Original title is La Noche de Terror. Yeah, it is. It's part of the Gates of Hell. So, anyway, I don't really remember this movie. It's been so long since I've seen it. I know I have seen it, but it is now on my list to rewatch because it's just been a really long time. And I like zombie nonsense.
And the cover is like another iconic cover.
Absolutely. Sean, how about you? Do you have anything you would throw in there as a ultimate cult classic horror movie?
Well, I think I agree with Boomer. I have some kind of picks across the decades, like different eras of movie. And like to your point, Rocky Horror Picture Show isn't really a horror movie, but it's in the title. So I would say that's like probably one of the ultimate, but like way back in the day, I'd say probably Plan 9 from Outer Space is a horror movie. I think that's a cult classic. That's pretty iconic. And that's one that a lot of people, maybe that's more sci-fi, but I would say it's horror because
you got Vampire in that.
Yeah, true. So. Chopping Mall of the 80s. I feel like that's a pretty big cult classic. Whenever I see people talk about, what's a movie, blah, 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 and that comes up a lot. And I'd say like 90s, maybe something like Candyman. Candyman seems like it's pretty iconic and pretty cult. Those are my picks.
Those are good picks.
Thanks.
I approve.
I can live another day.
Yeah. Most of the ones I would say have already been mentioned. Like I would throw, like I said, I definitely think Reanimator is one of them. I agree with Frankenhooker, and I would piggyback on that and say Basket Case should probably be in there as well.
Yeah, probably.
So I would definitely go with that. Movies like The Brain, not Brain Dead, The Brain, also with David Gale in it. That's another good kind of little cult classic movie. Jeez, what's another one? I could probably, if only I had all day to think about this, because I'm the one who posted this question, I probably could have come up with more. But the majority of the ones that I would pick have already been said. And Rocky Horror Picture Show, whether you want to consider it the ultimate horror cult classic or not, I can definitely see the argument that it's just flat out the ultimate cult classic movie. Because, much love and admiration for that movie. And he's absolutely right. Like the following behind that movie, if you ever want to have a good time, go find a theater that's playing that at midnight and encouraging costumes and all that shit, you'll have a good time. It's a fun one to watch in that kind of environment. So it's also one that we need to talk about on the show at some point, which who knows if or when that will happen, but it probably should. You got anything else you want to tack on, or are we ready to wrap up?
Ready to wrap up.
with that in mind, so when we wrap up, we say, please go follow us at all these social medias that we give a shit about. We are at Dewey Podmonster. If we are on that network, you can search us. If we have an account, you can follow us. If we don't have an account, you can find us on one of the other ones and tell us to get an account, and we might or might not oblige. It just kind of depends. You can also find our shows and all new shows, old shows. Send us feedback at our websites. I flubbed the word Rotten Tomatoes and said Rockin' Tomatoes, so you can now go to rockintomatoes.com, which will take you to crap.town, all these great sites where you can find all of our content. And of course, you can go to yourunpodcast.com, which is the network that we're very happy to be members of, and go check out our content. And again, I encourage you to check out someone else when you're there. Doesn't matter who, just please check out someone else while you're on that site, because there's a lot of good content on there. Sean, what am I forgetting?
I would just add, if you want your answer to the question of the week read on the show, you can answer the question of the week on social media. You got to follow us, or you don't really have to follow us. You just have to answer it, and you'll find us at Dewey Podmonster. If you liked any of the things that we talked about, if you want to know about any of the things we talked about, it'll be in the show notes. You can click on those links. Some of those links, probably one or two of them, are going to be affiliate links. We try to make them free if we can find free ones, but, there are going to be some affiliate ones in there, mostly the Amazon ones. If you click those, if you buy something, if you buy that movie, if you rent that movie, if you buy something on Amazon because you clicked our link and followed our advice, we might earn $1. So that'd be pretty cool. And other than that, if you want to follow my Michigan craft beer content, you can find me at youtube.drafttherapy.com, or you can find me on all social media at Draft Therapy.
So that's it. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. As we mentioned earlier in this episode, we are going to be showing Re-Animator at Batch Brewing on February 13th. It is a romance movie after all. This is the closest thing we could do to a Valentine's movie since we showed My Bloody Valentine last year. This year, we're showing Re-Animator. Please come out, hang out with us, have a beer or two, have a hot dog, and watch this movie with us. It will be a good time. We'd love to have you there. Until then, and until next week, we're going to say have a good week, have a beer, cheers, we'll see you soon.
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Three, 2, 1.
Can we do that again?
3, 2, 1.
Nice. Perfect.
You want another one?
It's a pizza. It's a nice. No, that's good.